Namaskar, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Mrshl Diptendu Choudhury was here with us. हमारे साथ second time आए हैं. So पहले तो let's do a big namaskar to sir and welcome to the show. Sir ji, thank you so much for your time and once again welcome.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Aadi.
सर के साथ हमने पिछली बारी ऑपरेशन सिंदूर के बारे में बात करा था. Lot of you loved the program. आज मैं सर के साथ थोड़ा फ्यूचर के बारे में भी बात करूंगा because it's important for us to look at दुनिया में क्या चल रहा है. एंड अगला हम बिकॉज लेट मी जस्ट पुट माई सेल्फ वेरी क्लियरली, जो जब भी एयरफोर्स के बारे में बात करते हैं ना तो डिस्कशन कहाँ जाती है, तेजस मार्क 1 है, तेजस मार्क 1 2 जेट इंजन, वही फंसे रहते हैं हम लोग. ठीक है, देयर इज अ सेगमेंट ऑफ द एयरफोर्स व्हिच हैज अ प्रॉब्लम, बट देयर इज आल्सो अ सेगमेंट ऑफ द एयरफोर्स व्हिच इज अनदर सेगमेंट व्हिच इज एक्चुअली डूइंग प्रीटी वेल. हाउ डू वी बैलेंस दिस? ठीक है, द मैन्ड एंड द अनमैन्ड सेगमेंट, फ्यूचर क्या होगा, रॉकेट्स, मिसाइल्स, ड्रोन्स, लेट्स टॉक अबाउट ऑल दैट स्टफ. सर, सबसे पहले मैं आपसे पूछूंगा, ये जो we've done Sindoor, we've seen couple of operations on our east also, unconfirmed. हमने इजराइल ईरान का भी एक देखा किस तरह से इन्होंने चीजें करी. What is the biggest learning for the Air Force, sir? Is it standoff? Is it distance? Is it inclusion of drones? क्या है सर, क्या सबसे बड़ी लर्निंग रहेगी?
Adi, you asked a very, what should I say, very deep question. But here मैं एक चीज बोलना चाहूंगा कि एयरफोर्स से ज्यादा ये हमें एवरेज हिंदुस्तान के पब्लिक और स्ट्रेटेजिक कम्युनिटी को ये रियलाइजेशन हुआ कि एयरपार क्या कर सकता है. इट इज नॉट दैट कि हमें एयरफोर्स को नहीं मालूम था. एयरफोर्स हैज बीन वेल अवेयर ऑफ दिस, क्योंकि इफ यू लुक एट इट, हमारे जो बोलते हैं ना किलर ड्रोन्स वगैरह, हम 10 साल से ज्यादा हमारे पास है. So Air Force has been far-sighted, but it has been restricted in its capabilities because of resources like you have mentioned. दूसरी बात, हम इन सब चीजों के बारे में ज्यादा बात नहीं करते because they all have an operational connotation. Because moment you know कि ये system आ गया, मतलब it brings with it एक capability. Automatically उस capability के साथ एक concept of operations emerge हो जाता है. So that is why हम ज्यादा बात नहीं करते हैं इसके बारे में. पर there is a lot of awareness today in India on what air power can do, which is a welcome change. पहले ऐसा नहीं था. पहले हम एयर पावर के बारे में बात करते तो हम इंटरनेशनल सिनेरियो के बात करते रहते हैं. वहां पे इजराइल ने ये किया, यूएस ने ये किया, गल्फ वॉर में ये हुआ. हमारे एयर पावर के बारे में चर्चा ज्यादा नहीं होता कभी. और हमारे इसमें दो कारण है. एक तो प्राइमरीली एयरफोर्स इस मामलों में काफी ढीला है, इफ आई एम टू पुट इट sort of bluntly, in the sense that Air Force has not expended adequate effort to tell the nation कि भाई हम क्या कर सकते हैं, क्या क्या करते हैं, कैसा काम चलता है, कैसा how does air power play an important role. So ये कमी एयरफोर्स में से रहा. दूसरी बात एक ये भी था कि देखिए, लास्ट टाइम हमने एयर पावर जो ओपनली यूज किया था खुल के विदाउट एनी रेस्ट्रिक्शंस वाज 1971. वो भी देख लीजिए, इट्स ऑलमोस्ट आई थिंक 55 years हो गया. कारगिल 25 साल हो गए. तो एयर पावर को जो एम्प्लॉयमेंट है, उसका जो यूटिलाइजेशन है, वो हमारे नैरेटिव से खिसक गया है, बिकॉज वी हैवंट हैड अ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट इतने सालों से. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि एयरफोर्स वाज नॉट अवेयर ऑफ व्हाट इज हैपनिंग इन द वर्ल्ड. एयरफोर्स वाज वेल अवेयर. इट वाज कीपिंग इटसेल्फ अप एज मच एज इट कुड विद इन द रिसोर्सेज अवेलेबल. बट हाँ, हमारे देश में हमारे स्ट्रेटेजिक कम्युनिटी, हायर लीडरशिप, ब्यूरोक्रेसी, थिंक टैंक्स, एकेडेमिया, मीडिया, इनको ये सडनली रिवाइवल हुआ है अबाउट एयरफोर्स पोस्ट सिंदूर. तो इजराइल, आपने यू हैड मेंशन्ड इजराइल. नाउ इजराइल का काफी यूनिक है, क्योंकि उनका साइज देखिए और उसका जियोग्राफी देखिए. इट हैज नो चॉइस बट टू रिलाई ऑन एयर पावर, बिकॉज बाकी जो देश के जो रीच हैं, इफ यू सी द साइज ऑफ इट्स एडवर्सरीज, erstwhile adversaries, और अभी नेबर्स, सारे इट्स ऑल बिग कंट्रीज and the fairly large space. So it's very difficult for Israeli army to do anything beyond a certain distance. Whereas the Israeli Air Force, air power gave them the capability to reach inside the adversary and hurt them. तो ये चीज एक रिवाइवल हुआ है आजकल ऑफ ऑफेंसिव एयर पावर. तो इजराइल वाज अ नेशन व्हिच हैज यूज्ड एयर पावर, बोलते हैं ना, स्ट्रेटेजिकली from a national interest perspective. हमारे यहाँ we have, whenever we talk about defense forces, we tend to think essentially, and because we have one of the largest armies in the world, of the army. And in the recent terms, आजकल काफी चर्चा चला है regarding the navy in the strategic capacity in the Indian Ocean region. बट इन सब 5-6 साल 10 साल के आप देखिए डिबेट्स में एयर पार के बारे में बात बहुत कम ही होता था, बहुत कम चर्चा होता था इसके बारे में. इट वाज प्लस देयर वाज सम misplaced perceptions about with some people who thought who felt that air power was only a supportive role. इसका कोई अलग सा वो नहीं है, क्या बोलते हैं ना, सीरियस स्कोप एंड रोल नहीं है. बट ऐसा नहीं है. एयर डिफेंस के बारे में हम सब बात करते हैं, बट एयर डिफेंस इज ओनली वन स्मॉल पार्ट. Offensive air power is a major important part of the Indian Air Force and Indian air power, जो चीज अब मेन टेबल में वापस आ गई है. So that is one very important aspect of the recent what's happening around in the world and especially post Sindhu.
ये तो नैरेटिव की बात करी सर आपने. Now when we look at the kind of warfare, do you think जो recent events हुए हैं उससे एक तो अंडरस्टैंडिंग आपने बताया कि लोगों को थोड़ा समझ में आया है कि भाई ये होता है, भाई ये ऐसे ड्रोन्स हैं, ये एंटी एयरक्राफ्ट है, ये ब्रह्मोस है, ये वी यूज्ड टू सी दीस थिंग्स, वी नेवर न्यू क्या है. व्हेन वी सी देम इन एक्शन यू लाइक ओ ओके, ये दम है इसके अंदर, जबरदस्त है. बट सर द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ एयर पावर जो था कि भाई एयर डोमिनेंस होना चाहिए, एयर सुपीरियरिटी होना चाहिए, एयर सुप्रीमेसी एंड यू नो दोस टर्म्स व्हिच आर देयर, डू यू थिंक दैट हैज चेंज्ड इन एनी वे? Or do you think that even if somebody has air superiority or dominance or anything, you can still breach him and kind of create a lot of havoc? Because that concept, if you can help us understand.
So ये concept, what you have just covered, air superiority, supremacy, domination, these are all, like you rightly brought out, they are concepts about control of the air. Now, control of the air goes back to right from Dudeja, who was the Italian general who first wrote the air power theory about air power, and he talked in his famous book called Command of the Air. He was the one who started this whole thing that if you control the aerial medium, you willy-nilly control the surface below it. But हुआ क्या कि उन दिनों में the concept was carried to extreme. उन दिनों में technology was old. It was still under development. Air power had just come into the world. जहाज पुराने दिनों के बाईप्लेन्स वगैरह ट्राईप्लेन्स होते थे वर्ल्ड वॉर 1 में, बट वर्ल्ड वॉर 1 and 2 सॉ द रियल डेवलपमेंट ऑफ एयर पावर. एंड ये जो कंट्रोल ऑफ एयर आया, इट केम फ्रॉम देयर. दैट्स व्हेन दे रियलाइज्ड, बिकॉज द सरफेस मूवमेंट, एंड यू सी इट वाज कॉन्टिनेंटल वॉर अक्रॉस ह्यूज स्पेसेस, सो द रेट ऑफ प्रोग्रेस ऑफ warfare was limited by the limits of the surface forces. The only way we could really shape the enemy's mind and hurt him deep inside was air power. But air power was used essentially by bombing was a main instrument of employing air power उन दिनों में. So control of air concept बहुत पुराना है. But control of air बीच में ये ऊपर नीचे होता है, ये इसका understanding, because of people don't have a clear understanding of what control of air means. And like you said, so control of air, there are different degrees of control which is there in air power theory. So classically जो बोलते हैं was used to be air supremacy, which means that you control an airspace in such a manner that you're supreme there. There is very little, probably nil or very little interference from the adversary. That means adversary's ability to use his air power gets restricted very severely. That is air supremacy. Then comes air superiority, where you can achieve most of your goals with little interference, a degree of interference possibly from the enemy. Then comes the degree, uske niche is favorable air situation, which happens in more so in contested airspaces where the enemy also has a strong air power or equivalent air power or an air power of credibility, where it is not possible for you to dominate the airspace in such a manner. तो वहां पे आ जाता है what we call as favorable air situation. That means you seek to control that airspace for a limited period of time and a limited area of operations. So that will vary on depending on the national and operational requirements at that point in time. But the Western approach to it has been from air superiority and above, and that is what is maintained. But the reason why air superiority and air supremacy or air dominance is talked about so much in the Western narrative, because देखो, after 70 and after the 70s, probably the Vietnam War, every time the Western forces have gone into operations, and especially in the last 2 decades plus, has been with very little or no air opposition. Gulf War, anywhere you see, Europe, Kosovo, all this, there was negligible air opposition. Even Russia and Ukrainian Air Force disappeared practically after the first, initial hard fight back. Israel could do what it has done against Iran because Iran's Air Force has shrunk to absolutely practical non-existence. Means effectively it has a small Air Force, but it has never been airborne. So the point I'm trying to make is that control of air reached an extreme position where it felt that if you dominate that airspace entirely, you could carry out surface operations with impunity. And that has been proven in the West. But in Indian scenario, it's different. 1971 war, we planned and we gained air superiority over Bangladesh, what was East Pakistan earlier, simply because there was very little adversarial. There was only one squadron, and we had outnumbered them vastly. But Bangladesh operation was all a major surface operation. So for that, you needed that one squadron would have had already created fair amount of action, seen fair amount of action before the war started. Till moment the war was declared, when by the second day, by 2nd or 3rd December, if I remember correctly, IAF owned the airspace because its runways were put out of action. So the PAF squadron, which was there, the famously called the tail choppers of the squadron nickname, given the fact that it was on the other end of Pakistan, the tail of Pakistan. So the point was that we gained air superiority there, which gave us thereafter the total freedom of air operations, which played a significant role in the eastern side. That means we were able to support the army. We had taken out their runways. We had carried out a vast amount of interdiction missions. We had attacked their river communication. क्या वहां देख लीजिए बांग्लादेश में नदियां और बारिश में पूरे क्या बोला इतने सारे नदियां रिवरवेज हैं, पूरा टेरेन रिवराइन है जो बोलते हैं. तो पाकिस्तानी आर्मी का काफी कम्युनिकेशन रिवर से भी होता था. So Indian Air Force actually attacked all the little boats, whatever was there, and practically stopped its riverine communications, apart from the land communication. So it played a huge role. But in the western sector, against West Pakistan, our strategy was different. Chief Marshal PC Lal ka brilliant strategy tha. They had planned, and western front mein Indian army ka strategy was to hold the line, because we were on the offensive on the eastern front, and we didn't want western front to become such a pressure on us that we would be fighting in a manner where we would be stretched between the two fronts. So essentially, India was defensively oriented with limited offensive to keep the Pakistani army at bay. So here the air power played a huge role, Indian Air Force. We had planned only for favorable air situation. But what happened was, because of our persistent strikes in Pakistan against their airfields deep into their territory, our offensive missions of the IAF was enormous, an undersung effort. What it did, it forced the PF to pull back to the depth bases. तो हुआ क्या, बॉर्डर से लेके about 100 odd kilometers, आप पाकिस्तान के मैप देखिए, नॉर्थ से साउथ जो रिवर्स हैं, रिवर लाइन, उसके सारे communications are along the lines, railway lines, highways are along that, and that is the main line of communication. We were able to carry our attacks up to that. That means up to 100 kilometers we ended up getting air superiority because PAF withdrew to depth bases. So control of air is a very important aspect. Today, the understanding of control of air doesn't necessarily need you to dominate or fly over enemy airspace, as long as I can have enough offensive control over that place. आज कैसे होता है ये? हमारे एयर डिफेंस देख लीजिए, हमारे रडार्स, they look well inside deep into enemy territory, 100-200 kilometer तक, high altitudes. Now we have SAM systems which look well, long range SAM systems like the S-400 and the intermediate SAM systems. करता क्या है? That we have an offensive envelope, a katori jaise, offensive envelope over Pakistani airspace, which we can dominate with our offensive air defense एयर डिफेंस एक्चुअली टेक्निकली देखा जाए तो नो लॉन्गर क्या बोलते हैं ना डिफेंसिव रहा है, इट हैज बिकम एन ऑफेंसिव एलिमेंट. सो वी कैन शूट डाउन एन एडवर्सरी इन हिज एयर स्पेस. व्हाट आर वी डूइंग? वी आर कंट्रोलिंग हिज एयर स्पेस. व्हाट हैज इट डन? एफएक्स सिंदूर में देखिए, PAF thereafter his AD, the PAF Air Force, the fighters and other operations, they couldn't even get airborne for air defense, let alone carry out offensive missions. So control of air is a very vital aspect. It came in action over, let's say, over Iraq in Desert Storm. In Europe, it has played a role even in Ukraine. It has played a role over Iran. It will play a role. It played a role in Sindoor, and it will continue to play a role in any conventional war. वो हम चाइना के साथ करें या पाकिस्तान के साथ करें. तो ये एक बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट है ऑफ कंट्रोल ऑफ एयर.
सर इसके अंदर भी एक नेक्स्ट एस्पेक्ट इज ब्रीचिंग दिस पर्टिकुलर कंट्रोल. आई मीन आप देख रहे हैं स्टैंड ऑफ रेंजेस के साथ आप what all you were able to do, and now you're allegedly, nobody is confirming this, but you've tested a weapon which is the next generation BrahMos, 1500 kilometers hypersonic. I mean, you'll probably fire that damn thing from Hyderabad and it'll hit any airfield in Pakistan for that matter. So the delivery platforms and the requirements for them, how do they change with this kind of standoff distances? Do we still need इतना जो maneuverability के बारे में बात करते हैं, इतना ये चीजें बात करते हैं? I'm just trying to understand, sir, because the reason is there's so much debate on which aircraft to go for the future, which platform to go for. When I observe the future and what the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans are building as far as the sixth generation, they seem to be massively large platforms which are very low in visibility, carrying capacity, very large carrying capacity, huge ranges, and high speed. None of them are talking about dogfights and this and that anymore. Is that because the just the sheer distance and the development of air defense systems changes the entire paradigm of air warfare?
It's a very, very, very relevant question. And in fact, Adi, ये question ज्यादातर एयर पावर थिंकर्स एंड आजकल के जमाने में मोस्ट ऑफ द अदर स्ट्रेटेजिक थिंकर्स दे आर पॉन्डरिंग ओवर दिस होल एस्पेक्ट कि व्हाट विल एयर कॉम्बैट बी इन द फ्यूचर. लाइक यू सेड, हाउ डू यू ब्रीच enemy systems? Okay, so let's take it from a different perspective. First, we'll talk about the air defense system and why the standoff thing has come into play. So what has happened is, like, the air defense systems, especially surface to air systems, SAM systems, जो है वो काफी advanced हो गए, ranges बढ़ गए, radars बढ़ गए. Like I just covered, like in our case, what we have, an extended integrated air defense system. China has it. It is that famous anti-area access denial. What was it? It was actually a defensive construct. ये China has probably created that setup, but the concept is actually from the US Navy. It's a long, very old concept, and China doesn't think of it like that. Neither does Russia. But America had said both the Russia and China follow the A2AD concept. So while it is a Western concept, interpretation of a concept, but conceptually क्या है कि anti-area access denial. That means China का biggest fear was its mainland. And the fact that the US Navy, with its aircraft carriers, essentially air power at that point in time, could actually reach Chinese mainland and strike them. शुरू में तो ऐसे ही था. They had very little capability. So the Chinese,
I just want to add, you're talking about the first and the second Taiwan crisis where Americans had sent aircraft carriers and वो उस टाइम पे learning आया बाहर.
हाँ, वो तो अभी हुआ है. First ये थोड़ा, हाँ, so this whole push and pull for getting dominance over South China Sea and East China Sea and the Taiwan region is what led China. See, Chinese fear was what? That US was interfering in Taiwan and was supporting Taiwan. So their concern was that in this process, their mainland was under threat. So the Chinese Air Force का जो origin था was originally strictly for air defense of the mainland. Okay, ये शुरू से ही है, from Korea days. It has been very poor in its offensive capability In fact, it has not. The Chinese Air Force has never used air power offensively in support of its own troops. So the point I'm trying to make that air defense of the mainland was the bigger worry. तो इन्होंने क्या किया? Gulf War में देखा what the air power could do, and they realized that a strong air power, offensive air power, and weapon systems, if they can push the US fleet further and further away from their areas of interest, it serves the purpose. So what did they do? The whole idea of anti-area access denial was to deny the US and its allies proximity to the Chinese mainland where they could operate against China. That means carry out attacks against China. तो इन्होंने क्या किया? They got long-range systems, they got missiles, they put on, if you remember, ये तीन बहुत सारे islands, artificial islands create किए हैं. उनमें से 3 island है South China Sea में, Fairy Cross, Mischief, and I forget the third name. ये 3 islands है where they have created airfields which can hold more than 100 aircraft, SAM systems, radar systems, sensors. तो इन्होंने क्या किया? Strategically देखिए, ये mainland से बहुत दूर है, but these are an established outer tier of forts. समझ लें आप इनको. तो ये क्या करता है? They, उनका range adds to the depth and distance from the Chinese mainland. So effectively, they are pushing it further and further away. So this concept needed to be breached by the US, and a similar concept exists, or they're trying to create in Tibet, which any contingency against China, we will have to breach. So the game has always been, now that this kind of a defense system created, is it invulnerable? ऐसा तो नहीं है. हर system में there are chinks in the armor, there are vulnerabilities जो हम breach करके जाके मार सकते हैं. So this is what is the whole game. How long range standoff came up. Standoff targeting became because now you found air-to-air weapons of, let's say, a long-range BVR can fire up to 200, let's say 150, 200 kilometers. That means I can't bring my platform unless my platform has a range of 250 kilometers. Then I can shoot down the adversary before he can shoot me down. So ये ना range expand हो गया है. That is why dogfights in the classical old sense, that concept has changed. What we used to say close combat. When we were young, we did a lot of close combat. Maneuvering was the main thing because the weapon capability limited the offensive capability of the platform. तो अभी dogfight का concept change हो गया. Now it become long range dogfights. किसका missile ज़्यादा दूर जाता है. Hence, platform maneuverability has come down a little, but the more important is stealth and survivability against the adversary, where I can fire the adversary and shoot him down in his own airspace, or fire my air-to-ground systems, weapons, at distances outside his air defense envelope. That is how conceptually the whole aerial warfighting domain has expanded. So ye ho gaya. That is why you will find larger platforms which are relying more on stealth. 6th generation जो आ रहा है, जिसकी काम चल रहा है already. ये तो चलता रहेगा. रही बात एक और चीज, why is it that you need the airborne platform? Still, what we can do from ground, what we can do with drones, because the aerial platform, a manned platform, gives you enormous. You mentioned you can fire a missile from Hyderabad into Pakistan. But do understand, that means I'm increasing the range unnecessarily, extra flying time, more reaction time to the enemy. You can do that technically. But against China, I would like to fire it from a place within India, but which allows me the reach deep inside the adversary space, beyond Tibet. So the position of what I can do with an aerial platform is much more flexible. मैं हैदराबाद से फायर कर सकता हूं, उसका नॉर्थ जाके फायर कर सकता हूं, दाएं बाएं, I can move that platform and target an enemy at will. So the response time, the weapon accuracy to be able to guide the weapon in the terminal stages if required, and the amount of load which you can carry, the accuracy increases, the flexibility is enormous. So for a great amount of time, the focus which was only on stand-in capabilities now has come into stand-off capabilities. Conceptually ये थोड़ा change हो गया है air warfare.
You know, ये आपने जो समझाया, this is extremely interesting. So this basically means though आपका there is a complete rethink of how the future generations of aircraft will come. Now, so let's sprinkle in the unmanned systems. the cats warriors and this and that and all that stuff that we are talking about. So this is the last segment that I want to talk to you about. Now the unmanned, some people say, and I've been reading a lot of air power experts, कई लोग बोलते हैं यार 50% manned होनी चाहिए, 50% unmanned होनी चाहिए. Now, how do you come up with something like that? How do you come up with a concept something like that for a country like India, where one आपकी terrain ही इतनी कहीं पे सारा super cold, कहीं पे super hot, कहीं पे झाड़ में पिघल जाओ, कहीं पे जमी जाओ. You know, it's a very varied sort of a environment. So will the Indian Air Force evolve into 4 separate air forces for our theaters, looking at the kind of theaters that you're fighting? What will happen in terms of the balance between the two, sir?
Yeah. So, Aadi, this is the million-dollar question from an Indian strategic perspective. Okay, how do you balance your forces today? There is no denying that manned fighters or manned platforms are not going immediately, despite what Mr. Elon Musk thinks, and he said that the future is entirely on the unmanned. Maybe very long time in the future, yes, but nowhere in the near future. I will put it this way, because every country of consequence is trying to build a 5th, if not a 6th generation platform. Why are they investing so much of money? Please understand, most of the major militaries in the world have significant air forces in which manned platforms are a significant part of it. What we are seeing, this drone warfare, is a lower end of the spectrum. When you go into an operation, you will need every element of air power and platforms for the future. So ये बोलने की खाली drones ही रहेंगे immediate future में, ये थोड़ा गलत बात होगा. This is probably a what should I say, overstatement at this given time. So can all these big militaries wish away their large platform inventories, cost intensive platform inventories, and start replacing them with unmanned platforms? Then you would have seen the transformation already in the leading air forces in the world. That hasn't happened. What has happened is expansion of the air pass capability and weapon systems. That means you have manned, you have unmanned, you have drones of different kinds and scale. You have rockets and missiles. They have all expanded the scope and employment possibilities of air power. So ye ho gaya the most important part. From India's perspective, our threat perception is very different from most of the world over. Nowhere does a country shares borders and faces threat against 2 major countries, of which one has an air force which is near peer, that is Pakistan, and which is constantly trying to narrow the difference between the Pakistan Air Force's capability and ours. And then you have the Chinese, who have realized the importance of air power, and they have huge respect for India's air power capability, and now trying to reduce the asymmetric advantage which Indian Air Force still enjoys for a little while in the Tibet region. तो हमारे दोनों दुश्मन के strong air forces हैं, जो उनके मिलिट्री स्ट्रेटेजी में इंटीग्रेटेड है, वो हमने देखा है. तो हमारा क्या फोर्स प्रोपोर्शन होना चाहिए is something obviously the specialists will do, but they will do a lot of studies in this. But here, the what I fear has happened and what is happening is ये drones को लेके हम इतने carried away हो गए हैं. And do understand, drone threat is widespread, but the damage it does is not so much. But its nuisance value is very high. So it will saturate your air defenses. It will keep your air defense under pressure. It will be able to penetrate. You cannot have an air defense which can stop all drones 100%. Israel couldn't do that with the best air defense systems. The point I'm saying is, future में air defense का भी limits है. अभी भी है, आगे भी होगा. So how much ever you build up an anti-UAS system, however good it is, future wars have shown us, and current wars have shown us, that missiles, rockets, drones and weapons will still be able to penetrate into your mainland. आगे क्या होता है? लड़ाई used to be only in the borders. Now your targets, they have the capability of bringing the war. लड़ाई आपके घर में पहुंच गए. आप 200 किलोमीटर अंदर हैं, आगे मिसाइल गिर सकता है. तो जो पहले हिंदुस्तान में नहीं था, नाउ टुडे देयर इज अ लार्जर चांस ऑफ अर्बन टारगेटिंग हैपनिंग इन द फ्यूचर. तो ये चीज, it has become an important thing we must remember in mind, that when we balance a system, हमारा country इतना बड़ा है, this is the biggest challenge, and you brought out the geographically इतना different है. नॉर्थ ईस्ट में चाहिए dense jungles, hills, which has its own dynamics. आप नॉर्थ देखिए, high, the Himalayas are there. You look at Punjab area, different kind of sector. Go further south of Punjab, you look at across Rajasthan, Gujarat, it is on the desert sector. Then we have a huge maritime domain. Can we have a force? Can we apportion air power and structure that every theater will have only that theater specific systems? No. That is the most, that works for the army and the navy, I mean, most of the army, because the force structuring is different. But for us, the same platform will operate over the high altitudes, in deserts, and over the sea. So can we redistribute our very limited squadrons specifically to theaters? No. You need a more agile force which is together, where today if I need to send strikes into northeast, I can fly aircraft from, let's say, I mean theoretically from Trivandrum and Gujarat all the way to the northeast for a couple of missions and bring it back to a different sector immediately. So that is the flexibility of air power, and that is essentially the main reason why we look at air power a little differently. Air Force looks at it differently from the classical theater construct of the army. हमारा और कोई organization में कोई वो नहीं है. We don't have any issue on that. We have no, in fact, we are the longest proponents of joint war fighting. देख लिया, the Air Force was the one to first create joint war fighting institutions with the army and the navy. So, but the problem is we need to understand that force structuring, when you do, it has to be done holistically as air power. Can we have army creating its own fighter fleet? Can we have Indian Air Force creating its own, let's say, maritime assets? No. जिस सर्विस का कोर कॉम्पिटेंस है प्राइमरी, उनको उसमें ध्यान देना चाहिए. And the service specific roles of air power, what the service can meet within their budget, please go ahead. Rest, you have no choice but to rely on the Indian Air Force. That is how it has been. That is how it is world over in all the air forces. So it is, problem here kya hai ki everyone wants to own air power, which is very difficult, expensive proposition. Now very easily people say, yeah, helicopters hame chahiye, fighters chahiye. They don't realize that you need training, you need infrastructure, you need to build up your repair maintenance facilities. It's an enormous expense, and you need to build years and years of skills and expertise in this. So that is something people forget in the short term thinking. So future balancing air power most certainly will be, let's say, like today army needs drones in the tactical areas. So if the tactical battle areas are going to be such highly contested airspaces with a lot of air defense systems, short range man-packed systems, shoulder-fired systems, drones are the only option. Yeah. Because air power has to stay out of the threat envelope of the SAM systems. So the concept of close support will change. Interdiction will change. Strategic targeting, which हम ज़्यादा हमारे military thinking में ज़्यादा ध्यान नहीं देते थे, has become an important aspect, because that is the only way you can shape or hurt a nation enough to come to the negotiating table. You can't do it with just border war fighting and give or take of a few kilometers. So air power balancing, force balancing has to be done in a holistic manner. Indian Air Force, what Indian Army needs, Indian Navy needs, in a way that they complement each other and not duplicate or come in conflict with each other. That is the most important thing, and that is how the force balancing must take place.
Last question, sir. This one actually explained a lot, and I'm sorry if I'm asking you technical questions. And the point is, the debate has to move forward. Abhi kya hai, debate kya hai, Tejas le lo, ye le lo. Yeah, the debate has to move forward. That particular problem has been there in the Air Force. Abhi se nahi, पिछले 20 साल से, 30 साल से. Air Force has learned how to live with it, and I think they'll be able to figure it out. And वैसे भी जहाज आ जाएंगे, हो जाएगा. It should not be a problem. But my big question, and this is going to be about air defense, the next generation of And what we are seeing right now is saturation kind of warfare, not just in land, but sea and air, everywhere. Overwhelming numbers. Basically, nobody wants to fight, but they want to overwhelm and put the enemy down and say, "Yeah, main nahi lada. Yeah, I'm not doing this." So what that is a battle of numbers, right? It's a battle of cheap, and instead of manned and unmanned, I'm going to go with the costing. So battle of cheap, mid-level, and very expensive equipment, all blended into the same battle pictures. So you got your Karts Warrior, which is probably fifth generation equivalent or linked with that, supremely expensive. And you've also got the Shadiwala drone, which is pointing red lights while entering the enemy because he's confusing the hell out of him. And he's able to see these red lights hovering all over him. So it's also confusing and psychologically very damaging. So the conventional form of warfare is dangerous, especially with our neighborhood, because we've got guys like Pakistan and China and all nuclear powers. So the escalation matrix goes up really fast. But the unconventional domain, where you can play psychological warfare with air power, is there any plan that we are working on in the future? Because here's something I said some time ago, and I think I discussed with you offline. We should have some 2-3 million drones ready. कोई आंख उठाए 5,000 ड्रोन भेज दो उसके घर के ऊपर. Let him, and we are seeing the impact in Myanmar. There's a mental breakdown that I'm seeing over there. They are worried to come out of their huts. कि यार साला ऊपर से क्या फेंकेगा समझ नहीं आ रहा. And I'm talking about cheap tatty drones that can just dump a bloody grenade. It's about numbers versus quality. So how do you balance this going forward?
So as I was talking out earlier, this question is something which is not going to go away. No. It will probably dominate our narrative and thinking and planning for some years to come. But I would like to, यहाँ पे मैं बोलते ना caveat एक थोड़ा caution डालना चाहूँगा कि today what has happened. आप देखिए, today any warfare, war fighting has so much of a media and awareness and discussion and narrative. असली चीज क्या है? That is what affects everybody. Oh, इतने सारे drones हैं, सारे आगे हैं, bloody ऐसे ही defeat कर देंगे पाकिस्तान को, या ऐसे ही 5,000, 10,000 ड्रोन. 10,000 ड्रोन तो महीने में गिरते हैं यूक्रेन रशियन वॉर में. तो finally it comes down to how much is the nation capable of sustaining capacity. देखिए, actual wars will be decided by outcomes of how depth, बोलते हैं ना, how big and how deep is your bank balance, how deep is your pocket, how deep is your capacity. शुरू में आप जो करेंगे वो तो बोलते हैं ना, like starters हैं, opening trailers हैं, you do this and you can keep doing that because see, those are cheaper. Like you said, you can keep harassing the enemy, but harassment, you will realize people get used to it.
That's a good point.
Today, आप देखिए, you and me have got used to being frisked at every mall or a bus stand or a railway station. So tomorrow, drones will also become a accepted way of norm. Can you prevent every grenade carrying drone across our huge frontage? Impossible. वो तो घुसेंगे ही कुछ, आप मार गिराएंगे कुछ, टेक्नोलॉजी बढ़ जाएगा. सिंदूर इज व्हाट सिंदूर आपने देखा और हमने देखा. ये टेक्नोलॉजी will take a jump. People will learn lessons. They will find ways and more means to make your drones more effective. इस side में भी counters सोचेंगे. So that is at a lower end of the spectrum, war fighting spectrum. But हमारे adversaries, the two key adversaries are not like Myanmar. They have an immense capacity, capability, and mental makeup, adversarial makeup against us, and that makes a lot of difference. So in countries like Pakistan and China, in any conflict with them, will just sending thousands, 10,000s, let's say 100,000 drones across the entire border, will that force Pakistan to come to the negotiating table? I don't think so. They will come to the negotiating table when it really starts hurting their military or their economy or leadership, their communications, their way of life, in their long-term prospects. That is how क्या बोलते हैं ना, strategic outcomes come when two nations go to war. It is not the tactical outcome it decides. It is the military objective and gains from a larger perspective. और वो तभी लगेगा दुश्मन को. Even China is the same thing. You can't win a war against China just by drones and war fighting. there will be a level of attrition, hitting and hurting where it hurts. But for that kind of warfare, again, capacity and capability is important. क्योंकि कितनी देर can we continue fighting like Israel and Gaza? Can we continue to fighting like Russia and Ukraine? I don't think so. That is not our nation's goal. We are a nation which is seeking to be a big power. हमें नहीं जाना उस तरफ. तो हमारे fights short होंगे. Short conflict में खाली drone से जीत जाएंगे? I don't think so. Short conflict में तभी जीत जाएंगे जब हम capacity to hurt दिखा पाएंगे. जो सिंदूर में हुआ, पाकिस्तानी एयरफोर्स को खबर हो गया कि look, despite their best systems, despite their narrative, despite the Chinese assistance and Turkish assistance, we them in a manner which is taking them a long time to recover. So that is what will be the deciding factor. So when I look at war fighting tomorrow, I do not think you can make force structuring and war fighting strategies based on one enemy or one set of conflict. You have to have a wide range. बोलते ना आपके म्यान में 10-12 तलवार होना चाहिए.
Multiple option warfare.
You have more arrows in your quiver, many more options. Absolutely. So that you can pick and choose and tailor these options to suit the conflict, context of the conflict. ये नहीं मैंने बोल रहा हूँ कि इस बार एयरफोर्स आगे था, कल आर्मी आगे होगा, कल परसों नेवी आगे होगा, कल उसके तरसों एयरफोर्स एंड आर्मी will have to do something. So that will depend on the context of that conflict. So this is where I think what has been very important this time कि इस बार हमने first time we have seen the leadership, political, military come together, weigh all options and decide, okay, this will be Air Force led at this point in time. Tomorrow, if it escalated, most certainly Army would have come in, Navy would have come in. Because the context was different. It was just an operation. Tomorrow, if the operation is different or we are going into a full-scale conflict, uske dynamics will decide the strategies there. So your force structuring cannot be to a fixed context of ki ladai aise hi hoga. That is the most important thing think we need to bear in mind for the future.
I think very well put, sir. I think I'm going to take this. I said it very frivolously, but multiple option warfare does make a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
It needs to be options in the bag where the chief at that time decides, this one, this suits best for the situation, for this thing, and that is presented to the leadership who kind of takes a decision. Very, very well said, sir. Sir, thank you so much. This has been really, really good because, I want to take the debate forward from the Tejas versus this thing, not because Air Force has a problem. वो तो है ही है, उसको acknowledge करेंगे हम लोग, and उसके ऊपर बात करते रहेंगे. But I want to take it forward. ये नहीं कि भाई fighter aircraft नहीं है तो बाकी सब में development रोक दो. We need to start thinking in this angle. And the reason I'm wanting to do this talk in the public domain is so that, so defense industry, I see these guys doing marvelous things. I recently had a chat with IG Drones. Amazing stuff that they're doing. And, they've been acknowledged nationally as well. So fantastic. And that's what I'm looking at. Conversation needs to become more public so that more people can develop and, make the industry move forward. Thank you very much, sir. This was insightful and looking forward for another conversation very soon. Till then, namaskar, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Aadi, and all the viewers of the Dev Talk. Thank you once again for supporting Aadi, and thank you for this opportunity once again.
Thank you, sir. To all the viewers, please like, subscribe, and put in your comments. And guys, whoever has a defense startup idea, listen to these conversations, come up with something. Namaskar.